everyone, my name is Katie from Lady Red Crafting, and today I am teaming up with Jackie from Crafting in Mimi's World to bring you some fantastic autumn-inspired DIY projects. From cozy home decor to festive fall decorations, we've got you covered. Let's dive into our first craft. We're starting today's project out with a board from the hardware store and our Waverly Antique Wax. And I am going to go ahead and stain both sides of this board using our antique wax. I thought I was going to use regular stain, but the antique wax worked amazing, and I really liked the color it brought to the board. And as you've probably guessed, we are making a leaner for our front door. And I really wanted to replace the fall one that I had previously. So I'm using these letters from Walmart, and I'm just going to place them down on a paintable surface. And using some painter's tape, I'm going to actually tape these down. And I found by taping these down, it does make it a little bit easier for me to actually get around the edges of the letter without getting my fingers all sticky with paint. So on these letters, I'm going to do a different painting technique that I haven't done before on my videos. For our first step, we are going to go ahead and paint a single coat over the top of the letter and on the sides. And I'm using multi-surface folk art paint, and this one is vintage white and it's a satin finish. And we're just going to do a really nice coat over everything. And you can see here by having this taped down, it's really easy to get the edges around the letters. Now, while that first coat of paint is drying, I grabbed these shelf liners from the Dollar Tree. And this is just like that rubbery shelf liner that you can find. And I'm going to cut a piece that will fit over the top of our letter. Once I have that laid over the top of our letter, I did grab some painter's tape and I just put a little bit down on either side just to make sure nothing moved around while we were painting. We're going to use the same paint we used earlier, and we're going to paint over the top of the shelf liner on top of the letter. And for this step, I do a thick coat of paint over the top of the letter. Now, while the paint is still wet, we're going to go ahead and remove that shelf liner from our letter. Now here you can see we have a really nice texture of paint over the top of this letter. Let's repeat this same step on the rest of our letters. I did use the same piece of shelf liner for all of the letters. All I did was wash the shelf liner or rinse it off under some water and let it dry for a minute before I reused it. And now that all of our letters have been painted and textured, I'm going to go ahead and grab out this plaid stencil that I've been using a lot in some of my crafts. And I did get this stencil on Amazon, so I'll put a link for it in my description box below. But I'm just going to lay this over the top of my letter. Now for our next layer, I am going to be using this real brown multi-surface satin paint from Folk Art. And this works out really nice. I'm just adding a little bit to my bowl, and then I'm going to brush this over the top of my stencil. Now with the texture underneath it and different things, I wasn't too worried about a little bit of bleeding because I wanted to make sure this kind of had a cozy and like flannel feel to it. And once we're done applying all of our paint, we're going to remove that while everything is still wet. And then I did go and I rinsed off my stencil so that I could reuse it on my next letter. We're going to keep repeating this step until all of our letters are the same. While these are all drying, I am going to grab this pumpkin that I got from the dollar store. And you've probably seen these around. They've had them for a lot of years. For our first step here, we're going to remove the hanger and the bow from this pumpkin. And I have found that using a heat tool or a hot blow dryer will help soften up that hot glue on your project, making it easier to remove. And now that I have our piece taped down to a paintable surface, I'm going to be using my multi-surface satin paint in the color Pueblo, and we're just going to give a nice coat of paint over the whole entire pumpkin. And I did do 2 coats of paint for this pumpkin. After I painted the pumpkin, I forgot to paint the stem, so I did come back with my real brown paint and painted the stem. And to give a little bit of dimension to our pumpkin, I did use the vintage white, and we'll just go ahead and dry brush really lightly around our pumpkin. Now, while that pumpkin is drying, I grabbed this Hello wood cutout from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to tape that down to a paintable surface. And you guessed it, we are going to paint this as well. I am going to be going ahead and using that real brown paint again, just to keep with our theme. And I did do 3 coats of paint over the top of this Hello. Now that we have our pieces made for our pumpkin, off camera I did make a cute little bow. We are going to hot glue and use some wood glue to put this Hello onto our pumpkin. And I like using this combination of glue because the wood glue takes a little bit longer to dry and sticks really well to other pieces of wood. But the hot glue gives it that immediate hold, which gives it time to cure for the wood glue. Now, once we have that Hello centered on our pumpkin, I do use my paint clips to clamp that down, and I do let this cure for about an hour. Now let's go ahead and remove our clips and add our bow. When I made this bow, I did use a pipe cleaner, so I left the little pieces of pipe cleaner on the end so it'd be easier for me to feed through that hole on the top of the pumpkin, and then I just wrapped that up and around the top of the pumpkin. Now that our pumpkin is complete, let's put everything together on our board. For this step, I laid everything out on my board and I just kind of eyeballed where I wanted everything. And then I went back in with my straight edge and I made sure to space everything out. And I did a spacing of about 1.5 inches. And to attach everything onto the board, I'm using my wood glue and a little bit of hot glue. And one thing you'll notice is that I do leave my straight edge on the board as I'm putting the pieces down underneath where I'm going to put the next item. So this helps me align where I'm going to put everything so I don't have to remember when I pull everything off to put the glue on. And once we have all of our letters attached to our board, I did let this sit for about an hour, hour and a half to let the glue just cure together before I lean this up against the wall. Now here is what our leaner looks like all put together. I cannot wait to display this for the fall outside my front door. This is just adorable. And we have the back side available for us to do a Christmas or Thanksgiving sign or Halloween sign if you'd like. So let's make a pumpkin stack with a twist. I'm starting out with one of these foam pumpkins from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to cut out a circle on the top. For our next step, I'm going to use some burlap from the Dollar Tree, and this roll is totally wrinkled when I pull it out. So what I'm going to do here is I spray this down with some water, and I'm just going to use my heat press or an iron, and you can just iron out all of those creases. And I cut this down to a 16.5 by 16 piece of burlap. And once I've done that, I just place my foam pumpkin on top. And then I'm just going to wrap it with the burlap, putting pleats in it as I go down and around the pumpkin. And I just stuff the excess fabric right into that center hole that we cut out earlier. Now let's grab some twine, and I'm going to just wrap that around the pumpkin in the creases of the styrofoam pumpkin that's underneath the burlap. So you're just basically giving that little wrinkle look that the pumpkin has. And I do 2 wraps on each one of those wrinkles. And then I just continue with the string until I get all of the wrinkles wrapped. Now, while we're wrapping that pumpkin, let me tell you all about this fun collaboration I'm a part of with Jackie at Crafting in Mimi's World. Her and I are both doing 2 full videos all about fall decor DIYs. I have linked Jackie and her channel in my description box below, so please check her out after you finish this video. And thank you so much for supporting both of our channels. We appreciate it so much. Now, once you finish wrapping your pumpkin, all I'm going to do here is cut my twine and tie a little knot at the top. And we don't need to worry about how perfect it looks at the top because we're going to be stacking another pumpkin on top of this. So pumpkin number 2, this pumpkin I also did get at the Dollar Tree, and I am removing that stem, but I'm going to save that stem. Next, I'm going to add some Spanish moss, and I'm just going to take a little bit of hot glue and put some Spanish moss over the top of the first pumpkin. Next, I'll take a little bit more hot glue, and we're just going to put that on the bottom of our second pumpkin and add that right on top of the Spanish moss. As you probably guessed, we will do the same thing on top of that second pumpkin, add a little bit of hot glue and a little bit more Spanish moss. Now for our last pumpkin, this one is the smallest of the 3, and I'm going to remove the stem on that one as well, and we'll go ahead and hot glue that to the very top of the pumpkins. If you remember, I said I was saving the stem from that second pumpkin. I really liked how this stem looked, so we're just going to reinsert that into the top of the third pumpkin. And once we have that there, we are going to do the twist part of this craft. Now, while I make that sound all exciting, I forgot I did need to trim up a little bit of that Spanish moss, so we just gave a little haircut because I didn't want too many flyaways on this. I wanted to go with some non-traditional flowers for the fall decor this season, and so I am actually going to be using some lavender, and I really liked this lavender, but it was too long. And I got this lavender from the Dollar Tree, so I just removed all the pieces from this pick that I received, and I'm just going to cut them in half, and they were actually still a little bit too long, so a few of them I actually cut into 4ths. Now, once we have all of our lavender pieces prepped, all I'm going to do is add a little bit of hot glue and then press those into the Spanish moss all over our little pumpkin stack. And to finish this pumpkin off, I am going to stick with the lavender theme, and we're taking a sheer lavender ribbon, and I'm just going to hot glue a ribbon onto the top of our stack. And then to give it just that little bit of farmhouse, I'm going to add a little raffia bow to the center of that. Now here is what our fun little pumpkin stack looks like. I cannot wait to display this in my office. It is a purple and yellow theme, so I thought this would be perfect in there. And if you can see down below, there's a little tray that I stuck these pumpkins on top of. I did make that in another video, so I'll put a link for it right here. And if you're enjoying this content, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. It really helps my channel grow. Thank you. Let's transform this wood house into a beautiful decor piece for your tiered tray or as a shelf sitter. For our first step, we're going to take a piece of painter's tape and tape this down to a paintable surface. Now that that is secure, I'm grabbing my Waverly chalk paint in the color Truffle, and I'm going to give a nice coat over the top of this wood piece. I also did paint the sides of this wood piece because if you're looking at it from a tiered tray, you still may see those. Now I'm grabbing my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster and this amazing stencil that I found on Amazon this year, and I'll put a link for it in my description box below so you can check it out. Now we're just gonna lay this over the top of our little house. Next, I grabbed a sponge brush that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to tap that down on a little piece of scrap paper there before I go ahead and I start painting my stencil. Now that we have our paint applied to our stencil, we're going to go ahead and just remove that really carefully. And this turns out amazing. You could leave it just like this, but I'm going to embellish it. We're using these fun cutouts from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just using one of the maple leaves. I'm taping this onto a paintable surface, and then using my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster will give a nice coat over the top of this leaf. Sometimes hot glue is not the right method for attaching things, and I felt that way for this project. So I'm using my Elaine's Tacky Glue and a paintbrush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a stripe of glue along the center of this little wood piece. And once we have enough glue in the center, I'm going to place a little piece of burlap over the top of that glue. And I did fray the edges on this ahead of time, just to give it a little bit more texture. Now for my next step, I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing with the glue, and I'm going to do a stripe of glue over the top of the burlap. But this time, I am going to add a ribbon to that piece of glue. Now, once those pieces have dried, I'm going to do the exact same thing for the last piece, but for this one, we're going to do it a little bit different. I flip over our leaf, and I'm using the same Elaine's Tacky Glue, and I'm going to brush the back side of the leaf to get glue on all sides. And now we'll just place that right in the center of our piece. And that's all there is to it. This perfectly simple little shelf sitter is ready to display on your tiered tray or on a shelf. Now let's flip this over and make something else on the other side, because who wants a plain decor piece when we can use the back side for another one? So I'm starting out with my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster, and we're just going to do a nice coat over the back side. Next, I went ahead and grabbed my Waverly chalk paint in the color truffle, and I'm just going to do a little bit of dry brushing on the outside perimeter of this little house. Now, every year, Dollar Tree gets these wonderful window clings in, and this year didn't disappoint. I'm going to use the Fall is in the Air piece on this window cling. Now, we're going to set this aside for a moment and go back to our block. Now that everything has completely dried, we're going to use our super matte Mod Podge over the top of this block. And while it is still wet, we're going to lay down our window cling. The Fall is in the Air. And I just tap that down into place. And while it was still wet, I decided to add a little pumpkin from the window cling pack as well. Now, once that has completely dried, I go back to my Mod Podge Super Matte, and we're going to do a nice coat over the top of this window cling, and that will take any of that sheen or window cling look away from that. So this looks like it was just part of the board, and it works out so amazing. So if you haven't tried this Super Matte Mod Podge before, I really recommend it. And now once this is dry, I'm just going to add a raffia bow to the top using my hot glue and a little twine bow on top of that just to give it a little bit more. And now I love how this turns out. Now we have a fun two-sided sign that we can put on our tiered tray or on a shelf. Let me know which side you like better, the leaf or Fall is in the Air. Let me know in the comments below. I love this little acorn at the Dollar Tree, but I did want to do it a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the thankful from the front of this acorn. And for this craft, I want to go with more of a black and white theme, so I'll save those pieces for something different. Next, I grabbed my zip sander, but a sanding block or piece of sandpaper would just be fine. And I'm just going to sand off any of that extra glue that was on there and just smooth it out as best that I can. Now, once I am satisfied with this piece, I'm going to take a piece of painter's tape and just tape this down to a paintable surface. Now let's grab our Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I'm going to do a nice coat on the bottom part of this acorn. And once I had 2 coats of the Waverly chalk paint on the bottom part of this acorn, I did do a single coat on the top part. And now that that's dry, I did take my little pen here, and this is a paint pen in the color black, and I'm just going to trace out the acorn pieces on here. I wasn't too excited about how this was looking, so I did take some of my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster again, and just dry brushed a little bit over the top of our acorn top. Now let's grab our Waverly chalk paint in the color Ink and just paint that stem a little bit of black paint there. Next, I grabbed this fun stencil, and I did get this stencil on Amazon, so I'll put a link for it in my description box below. And I'm going to get the one that says "It's Fall, Y'all," and we're just going to add that to the front of our acorn. And using our Waverly chalk paint in the color Ink, we're just going to go ahead and paint over the top of the stencil. And next, the fun part, we get to remove this stencil and see our beautiful design. And I'm liking how this is turning out, but I did decide that I wanted the acorn to be a little bit darker on the top, so I grabbed my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ink, and I'm just going to go ahead and dry brush a little bit more over the top. So you can do this in a bunch of different ways, whatever works best for your decor. I just kind of wanted to show you my method through my whole process here. And now that I'm satisfied with my acorn, I take a little bit of hot glue, and I'm just going to attach a little finger bow onto the top of our acorn. And that is my final bit for this project. I love how this turned out. It's such a classic look with the black and the white, but gives that farmhouse feel, adding that little bow. And there you have it. 5 beautiful fall craft projects. I hope you enjoyed these crafts as much as I did. And if you're looking for more fun and creative fall craft ideas, be sure to check out our next video. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button below so you never miss an update. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, craft more, stress less.